I first want to say thank you, Fahimeh Sasan. She's founding physician for Kindbody, which I have done a lot of research about. But just for starters, for the people that don't know a lot about it, I'd love to hear from you what Kindbody is and what they stand for, both in the world for women and for fertility in general.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, so excited to be here with you and wish you all the best in this amazing organization and endeavor. And I'm always a huge fan of women who are, career driven and entrepreneurs and really wanting to make a difference. So I applaud you for that. And it's really a pleasure to be with you. Kindbody is building a national network of women's health and fertility practices. We do the entire spectrum of gynecologic care and fertility care.
Yeah.
So women can come to Kindbody for a regular pap smear and just a routine once a year checkup to, helping a same-sex couple who needs a gestational carrier and needs donor egg and donor sperm to do in vitro fertilization. So really an end-to-end solution. And the reason why I feel so passionately about this company is that there's such a fragmentation that currently exists, particularly in women's health.
Yeah.
And there's so many barriers to access, and we want to provide a opportunity for women to have access. We want to provide a better, more comprehensive care experience that is surrounded with transparency and surrounded with, having a physician and a woman or a physician and a man, but
Yeah.
having our patients be partners with our physicians in the journey, as opposed to this pre-existing kind of patriarchal society where the doctor is the boss that tells the woman or the patient what to do.
Yeah.
And we want to use technology to be more efficient and to improve outcomes. And we want to recognize that a vast majority of the population, regardless of how well educated they are, know very little about female reproductive health.
Absolutely.
Um, and so when we talk about improving access, we want to improve access both by information and empowering men and women with knowledge and options. We want to improve access by creating clinics and centers that are where we live and work and play, and not hidden in some professional building where you don't even know that they exist.
Right.
But we also need to improve access by educating people about their options. You were talking about choice, and so many women live their lives thinking that, okay, it either happens for me or it doesn't. And we live in a time and age with advances in genetics and in science where there's a lot more choices than our mothers or grandmothers ever had, and
Absolutely.
helping women understand those choices and to really be a partner in helping them make those choices. And then you can't effectuate any of this without talking about cost and trying to go to, whether it's directly to the consumer and to the patient and helping them reduce costs, or by taking it a step further and going to employers and saying, you want to bring on fabulous women to be rock stars on your team, then help them in by promoting egg freezing and fertility preservation, because the workforce, and women are entering the workforce now more than ever,
Yeah.
and they're aspiring to not just be in the workforce but to lead
Leaders.
the
Yeah.
workforce. And so as a result of women achieving higher education, higher positions in their careers, by starting their own companies, all of these things, naturally women are getting older when
Hmm.
it comes time for childbearing.
Absolutely.
And so these companies and these employers need to recognize that, and support those members of their cast by providing better benefits that encompass things like egg freezing, and that's not something that should only be available to Google and Facebook employees, but that should be
Absolutely.
universally available. And then also, not to mention LGBTQ community, who have often
Yeah.
been sidelined because this doesn't pertain to you, but it should. And
Good.
so much we can talk about, and so many avenues of this that I feel so passionately about. And um,
Yeah.
so but that's what we do.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. And I think it's important to have the context because some people don't even know that this kind of service exists, right? And so I think until you get to a certain stage in your life, you don't start to have this conversation. And I know that you and I talked about choice earlier, and I know that I shared my article with you. And I think this idea of choice, specifically around fertility and just family planning, um, growing up as a young girl in our generation and generations before us, it didn't really seem like an option. I don't know about you, but I think as a woman, you just grow up thinking that you're going to be a mom. Like that's just what
Mm.
happens. And I think, of course, in these younger generations, they have the choice of having families and having careers as well. And I think it's perfectly aligned with what a labor of love represents, which is that you can have all of the things that you want and that
Yeah.
you dream about. But it really, for me, I told you I'm, super open about this. It took me a while to get here, but one of my closest friends, who you know very well, she's been talking to me about fertility for probably 10 years, and
Hmm.
I'm fortunate enough to have somebody in my life who works in this space and who could educate me. But I think a lot of people don't have that, right? They don't have that privilege. And as you start like growing up and you realize, okay, I want to have a career and I want to see the world and I want to have all of these things, you start to realize that for me, I'm going to start using I or
Yeah.
me because it's
Yeah.
very relevant to myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I started to realize that it didn't feel like a choice anymore. Like the options became less and less, and whatever, relationships didn't work out, and guys and I broke up, or whatever the case may be. It just didn't work out, and it still hasn't to this point, as far as like having that stereotype type of lifestyle that you're raised to think that you're meant to
Right.
have.
Right.
And so here I am. I'm 38. I do want to be a mom. I don't know how it's going to look yet. I probably have not taken the right or appropriate steps as far as what Kindbody would hope that I would own, or take the steps to ensure that I am able to have
Mhm.
that available to me. But yeah, I want to just like pause there for a second and see, sort of from an emotional standpoint, how do you like kind of work through this process as a doctor? I'm sure maybe you don't, but I'm assuming you do have women like me that come to you and say, hey, I don't know what to do anymore. It's not working out for me the way that,
Yeah.
like, you know whether it's
Right.
whether it's someone in my situation or someone who's dealing with infertility, which is a whole other conversation that we
Sure.
definitely want to cover. So yeah, I'm going to stop there and just see like, how is your approach on that from an emotional standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first and foremost is to be okay with the fact that it's an emotional topic,
Yes.
and that we are. Anytime you start talking about our bodies and our desires or lack thereof, and I will tell
Yeah.
you that women get just as emotional if they've chosen to not have children.
I'm sure.
Um, but I think anytime we talk about family and family building and exploring our options of when we want to have children and how we want to have them is going to be emotional, and for us to be okay with that. Like, I think that that societally there's a stigma against being emotional about
Yeah.
your fertility, and
It's
why not?
emotional in
I
general,
I
right?
can't
Yeah.
think of anything that's more emotional, right? If you're not going to be emotional about your fertility, what are we going to be emotional about, and so I think first is just to be okay with the fact that this topic makes you emotional,
Yeah.
and to also be okay with the fact that this topic might be a little frightening.
Hmm.
But then don't use that fear and that emotion to prevent you from seeking some action. Because what I hear a lot from my patients is that, well, I don't want to come to check my fertility because what if I hear something that
It's like
what
knowing
if I hear
sometimes is
what
almost
if I
better.
hear bad news, or what if I
Right.
hear something that I don't want to hear? And my response to that is I think that the not unknown should be more scary, because at least if we find out that there's an issue, then we can explore the options of
Yeah.
how we can resolve that issue. And I think the most important thing for women to understand is that whether we like it or not, time is not on our side when it
Yeah.
comes to fertility, and that our fertility is directly a result of
Age.
a relationship between age and
Yeah.
time and our number of eggs, which decline. But okay, I'm not saying that to be scary. I'm just saying that's the reality. So then, regardless regardless of how young or old you are,
Yeah.
be open to finding out your truth, right?
Yeah.
So that I always like to say you're never too young or too old to learn more about your body,
Mhm.
and to not just assume that you're fertile because you're young, and to not assume that, oh, my time has passed or I'm getting
Right.
too old, because there are some, even 40-year-old women who are still fertile, who get pregnant naturally, and that you can still be 38 and say, I want to have 2 or 3 kids.
Yeah.
Oh, you can. We just need to think about a different way of making that happen,
Yeah.
and just being open to exploring the options, and not being afraid of the emotional part, because
Right.
what happens, I think, for a lot of women is that it's such an emotional topic,
It is.
and it's what can sometimes be a scary topic, that we're like, okay, well, don't want to touch that, let me
No,
put that
it's
back
like,
on the shelf. And we'll address that next year or 6 months from now or at
yeah.
another time. And unfortunately, that's where we can get into trouble, because if you keep putting it aside, the options that existed for you at 38 may not exist for you at 39 or
Right.
and so I
Yeah.
think that's a really important part. And then two is that use technology, like use the science that is now available to us. I mean, it's one thing if I said, well, come and check your fertility, and then if we find out it's low, sorry, like,
Right.
it'll just be bad news. But I mean, actually say that with the advent of egg freezing and embryo freezing and opportunities for in
Yeah.
vitro fertilization and even donor egg and surrogacy and donor sperm, the opportunities and options can be endless, even if someone gets bad news.
Right.
So, so I think that's kind of my best advice is one, don't go down the rabbit hole of Google and start Googling, and then don't just assume one way or another, good or bad.
For your age or
Um,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, and just come and learn your own truth. And then once we have like your objective ovarian reserve, your objective antral follicle count, your objective facts based on your ultrasound and your blood work, then we can sit down and say, okay, objectively, here's your desires. How many kids do you want to have?
Right.
Realistically, how old will you be when you have them? And what can we do to maximize your options to achieve that goal? And recognize there's going to be options,
Yeah.
and ev- there's always going to be some option now, and then be open to that may not look like what you had in your mind
Exactly.
when you were in third grade, and that there's all different ways of achieving that perfect family,
Yeah.
and it may not look the way you had once thought, but that we still have options. And
Yeah, I think thank you for saying that. I also, when we hear, especially for people who are educated in it, from what I've known in the past, when I hear fertility, family planning, or infertility, I hear expensive and like unattainable. And I
Mhm.
know that Kindbody strives to have that not be the conversation and creating
Absolutely.
possibilities and
Yeah.
win-wins, which is what a labor of love is founded on, is how do we create win-wins and possibilities for people so that they can have the things that they dream about having. And so what would you say to that when someone, the first thing that they think when they hear fertility treatments or infertility
Mhm.
treatments, they hear dollar signs and just like, okay, that's not a possibility for me because I just don't have the money.
Yeah, and so then I would say, reach out to us at Kindbody, because we really, that's one of our core missions, is to reinvent the delivery of the healthcare, and part of reinventing that delivery is by reducing the cost. So our costs, across the board from a consumer perspective, are 40% less than the average clinic. And when you're talking about 40% of big dollar amounts, it's substantial.
Absolutely.
But also, we go to employers for people. We've had patients who come and say, I work for a big company, you know, a big, very famous company, and we don't have any of these benefits. And we'll actually send our team, our employer's benefits team, to that company and say, hey, did you know that the women in your company want this? And do you know that it's not actually that expensive for you as a company who spends, sometimes millions of dollars on benefits, that you can actually add this benefit, which makes a huge difference for your employee, but may not actually make that big of a difference for your bottom line,
Right.
and what a huge impact that can have on me as an individual. So that's one part. So we can really help go above and beyond.
Yeah.
But two is working with, let me, let me close this door.
Yeah.
um, is also, we can help. One of the things about medicine is people don't understand that there's so many avenues. We have opportunities for women to apply for discount programs that you would never know about. Like, there's discount programs for the medications for IVF and fertility treatment that people just don't know about, and most places wouldn't tell you. So there's discount programs you can apply for. We have financing options. We work through a third party where instead of paying it all at once, you can pay monthly payments.
Yeah.
But for example, at Kindbody, a cycle of egg freezing is $6,500. That doesn't include the medication, which can be variable from woman to
Mm.
woman. But I mean, there's places in the U.S. that charge $20,000, so we're talking already a fraction.
Right.
And I understand $6,000 is still a lot of money, but you can also pay payment plans so that you're not having to pay all at once.
Right.
And then there's also, we have, especially after the Black Lives movement that has touched so many of us, we
Absolutely.
started a grant to help for fertility benefits for, it's a grant for colored women,
Yeah.
to help raise money for that. And we can always help find avenues for women who really are struggling to try to find ways to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you really, healthcare for such a long time has become so sterile.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, at the end of the day, we're in a people business, right? And we should want to help each other, and especially when it comes to something that we're also
Yeah.
passionately attached to, which is our desire for family building and all of that. So we're here to help.
Yeah.
And I think just having financing options, telling people about discounts, lowering the price, and then really going to employers and being like, what are you doing? Like, this is crazy. And then also on another level, there's actually a lot of, since today happens to be election day, there's
Right.
a lot of changes being made, though, and it varies from state to state. But like New York just added a mandate for IVF coverage for companies that are based in New York, who have New York-based insurance, to cover more IVF
Yeah.
for employees. So there's some good change coming. We still have a long ways to go. Um,
Right. No, and that's absolutely true. And I don't want to get too political on this conversation
yeah,
because it's just, I don't want to alienate anybody for
yeah,
any reason. But I think it is important to address, all of the, regardless of what happens today and moving forward, there's going to be shifts in our healthcare system. And I think for women as well, I think there's going to be shifts for women. There already have been, both good and bad. And I think for me, it's really understanding what is available to me. And look, I'm creating something so that I can take control over my own life and
yeah,
control over the things that I want and hopefully create a space for other women to do the same. But not everybody has that desire, nor do they have the resources or whatever. And I'm hoping to offer some of those resources to women to be able to, see that to be possible. But we're in a weird time, and I don't like, again, I don't want to like harp on it too much, but I think even when we hear insurance and insurance packages covering it, and you guys are really, I know personally that you're going above and beyond to like really see that through, and I completely admire it. But there are people out there who are losing their jobs or don't have access to the insurance that you guys would hope to help them or support them. And so if they do want to envision family planning on their own, it feels just from my own experiences, it feels impossible. And so
right,
I have had to do the work. I've had to work really hard to see it as a possibility, and I still have to do the work to see it as a possibility.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what would you say to those people that might not have access to some of those privileges? Because that's what it is in this country. Like, healthcare is a
yeah,
privilege,
absolutely,
where maybe it shouldn't be, right? But it is.
right, right.
And so what would you say to those women that don't have that privilege and still want to have this very much so as a part of their future and their lives?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's obviously really difficult, right? It's at the end of the day, like I said, even though our prices are lower, there's still going to be some people that
Of
can't
course.
afford that amount of money. And I think, to those women, what I would say is, first and foremost, we can still educate ourselves with the knowledge of
Yeah.
our fertility, and do the evaluations, because the evaluations, like the initial assessments, are going to be covered by insurance.
Sure.
So if you do have just basic health insurance, we at Kindbody, for example, accept all the major insurances. So you can at least, at the very least, do the assessments. And if you don't happen to have health insurance, I know a lot of people are losing their health insurance right now, we can work with you on a case by case basis to about at least do the evaluation.
Yeah.
I think at least starting with the evaluation, so that you're armed with some knowledge, you might
Knowledge.
find
Yeah.
out you actually have really good fertility, and maybe you have more time to save money or
Absolutely.
whatever. Or you may find out that, okay, this is really something that is really time sensitive, and I, may not have the luxury to
Wait.
wait as long as I thought I could. And then I think, depending on the situation a person is in, that may help them in balancing what are my priorities at this point, and because I have, I meet some people who are intentionally waiting to have
Yeah.
children, and then you find out that, oh, well, maybe you need to move your timeline. And I recognize not everyone has the same access. You may not have a partner or whatever, but there, I think the sooner you act in at least learning more about your body,
Yeah.
even then, we can at least help explore options, and say, okay, based on the information we've gained, you have some time, take a
Right.
breath. Or, okay, you don't have that much time, but let's try to explore how we can help.
Mhm.
And it's really going to be on a case by case basis, based on the person's situation and what they want at that time, and what is achievable and attainable. What do you really want? And then again, it goes back to, you know not everyone there's no right perfect family. And so then maybe you find out certain results, and maybe adoption is a good path, maybe
Right.
another path to having a family. And so I think the first step, though, is to just do at least the initial evaluation.
Yeah.
And then we really want to be a partner for women in that journey as they try to explore their options.
Yeah, and I can say firsthand, and this is probably like a common misconception, going through the assessment or going through, I haven't gone through the actual process of freezing my eggs, but I did go through the assessment and the evaluation. And then I freaked
Hmm.
out and like, look,
Yeah.
I'm a real woman going through this experience,
Yeah.
so I can speak to it from my own personal story.
Sure.
But the assessment was physically harmless. Like there was no, it wasn't scary. It didn't feel like any certain way. And I think sometimes we just don't know, to your point, like we don't have the knowledge base. And
Right.
I think once you go through it, you're like, oh, well, that wasn't really that bad at all. Like I just had to get some blood work done. And of course they did
Ultrasound.
the exam,
Yeah.
the ultrasound. Emotionally, I think two of the things that I brought up with you over email, um, one of them is like this like feeling of failure. And you know kind of going back to what I said earlier, we're just, our generations and generations before us, we were just raised to believe that if you're a woman you become a mom at some point. And for me personally, I still want that, right? Like that's absolutely
Hmm.
something that I want in my
Sure.
story. But I think for some women it's not. And I think
Yeah.
that um society still to this day often treats those of us women that don't want children, not myself, but other women, that we're not like a complete whole person
Hmm.
without having
Yeah.
children. And so, again, I don't want to like push you too much on the emotional side, but I think it's
No,
really
no.
important because I think
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
what this is rooted
Absolutely.
in emotion. And once we can kind of like knock down some of those emotional barriers, it'll open the door for women to say, okay, well, just because right now I say I don't want kids, who knows what my partner is going to think in the
Right.
future, or if my mind might change, or you just never know. But I think for women that do make that decision early on, they just kind of like hold on to it and they want to prove that they are a complete whole person without, so much so that they might like automatically remove themselves from the opportunities to maybe have kids down the road.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what would you say to someone, not me because I do want kids, but someone who doesn't want kids and has sort of this idea that like they're not a complete whole person without having children?
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful question, and I think first of all it starts with this entire stigma that exists in women's health. So women don't talk even to each other. We
No,
don't talk about our periods. We don't talk about our miscarriages. We don't talk about infertility.
right?
We don't even like to tell people we're trying to get pregnant because, like, what if it doesn't work out?
Exactly.
And we don't tell people that we don't want to have kids, and we don't, we just don't share this information. And it's really a topic that our society, has put behind closed doors
Hmm.
and has created a veil over, so that many times women don't even talk to their own mothers or their sisters or their best friend about this topic because it's such a secret topic.
Yeah.
And so my first thing is that I think it's time for we as women to take control of this situation,
Yeah.
and not be victims of it,
Yes.
and to really start to create a whole new dialogue and a whole new narrative about this topic, and start shouting it from the rooftops. The more we talk about it to each other, right? The more we talk about it, the less scary it becomes, and the more real it becomes, and the more acceptable it becomes. And to really like the society created these pressures because of societal norms. But okay, well, society has changed leaps and bounds from when our grandmothers and mothers
Yep.
were having children, like tremendously. Across the country, um, and even across the world, women are waiting longer to have children. It is the reality of even little, I call them the states in the middle that don't touch water. Even
Yeah.
small town America are waiting longer. And so I think that really imperative that we change the narrative first and foremost. And then secondly, as we change that narrative, to then say, these are our new normals. Our new normals are that more than likely you will be over 35 when you have at least one of your children or all of
Absolutely.
your children. That egg freezing provides us an opportunity to take a breath and say, I'm going to freeze my eggs and I'm going to wait for the right partner and not settle if you're going to have a partner. Or I'm going to freeze my eggs because I still want to have 4 kids, even though I'm not starting till I'm in my 30s.
Right.
Or I'm going to freeze my eggs because I don't want to have a child now. But what if I
What if
want
I
to
do?
reserve the right to change my mind in the future?
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the sad part, is that there's so much that has changed in life expectancy. We eat better, we're healthier. So as a result, we live into our 90s. And, everyone has the old at like 40 is the new 20, 50 is the new 30, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, our reproductive, biology has not recognized this transition in life expectancy. So our biological clock is still kind of, 40 is 40.
Like the
And
evolution hasn't changed. The evolution of our
The
bodies always
evolution
stays
hasn't
that. I'm
changed,
like,
but we can change the dialogue.
yeah,
And I think it's really, no one's going to change it for us. So
yeah,
we as women of this generation and generations younger than us need to really be informative. We need to empower each other. And I think it's happening.
mhm,
Um, it really is. We are seeing a shift. I mean, we still have a long ways to go, but we're seeing it. Now more and more stars are actually talking about, oh yeah, yes, I got pregnant at 50. It's a donor egg. Do you know what I mean? And they're
I
talking
think
about that
so. Right.
that they use the surrogate, even the celebrities, that I used a surrogate, or that I'm having difficulty, and people are starting to share their stories of miscarriage. It's still few and far between, but it's starting to happen, and we just really need to applaud and encourage and support our friends and ourselves as we go through this, because the only people that are going to change this dialogue is us.
Yeah. And I think, we're just, maybe it's my own experience, so I don't want to like project on other people, but and then I'm gonna have to close that window because I can see like the glare coming in my face. The shame, like we carry so much shame around our bodies as women, and
Mhm.
I think that, again, not to get too political, but some of the decisions that are being made, or some of the decisions that might get made, depending on who does win this election and what direction we go in, like, it still carries some type of shame around it.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is probably the foundation of what needs to shift.
Mhm.
Is why are we like ashamed of our bodies, whether it means that our bodies decided that, you know whatever you believe in, God, your body, science, whatever it is, like, for some reason your
Mhm.
body isn't working in the way that you thought it was going to work, and
Right.
somehow it's your fault. Like, it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault
Yeah.
all the time. And I think that, um you know that's the other piece of this conversation. Of course, I want to talk a lot about egg freezing because that's relevant to me, and probably to some
Yeah.
people in my age demographic, although I'm getting onto the older side. I think that the conversation of infertility is really important. And I
Sure.
think so many of my friends have gone through miscarriages and just not being able to get pregnant. And I think, the shame and the sense of failure that I hear from them when they talk about it, if they talk about it, makes me so sad. And so I'd love, just for a second, for you to kind of dive into the conversation of infertility and, like, why we have that shame.
Yeah. So infertility is very common. Part of the reason why infertility is so common is that women across the country and really across the world are waiting longer to have children.
Yeah.
And as women wait longer to have children, we're going to have more and more fertility issues because as women, we're born with all the eggs we'll ever have, and we
Hmm.
lose eggs as we age.
Yeah.
And that's not something we can stop. That's not something we can control. It's not something where you can, you know, take a supplement or eat better or and it's also not like there's no correlation between how young you feel and how fertile you are, or
Right.
how young you act and how fertile you are, or even how healthy you are and how fertile you are. It's really a relationship between age and time. And so we're going to see more and more fertility issues. Currently 1 out of 8 couples will experience infertility.
Hmm.
And 1/3 of fertility issues are actually related to the man,
Hmm.
meaning male factor infertility. 40% of pregnancies, up to 40% of pregnancies, end in miscarriage in the first trimester. These are staggering numbers.
Yeah.
20% of women under the age of 35 will have premature ovarian failure or premature decline in their egg count, for sometimes unexplained reasons. And so, as a result, it's a common thing. The thing that's not common is us talking about it. So then, when it happens to us, we think we're the only one, and we think we're alone, and we feel ashamed, and we feel that we have to struggle in silence.
Hmm.
And that's where to kind of piggyback our prior conversation, it's time for women to be vocal about this, because the more we talk about it, the more um, together and comforting we can be for other women, even if we don't know them. But as soon as people start talking about their miscarriages and their fertility struggles, you start realizing, oh, that happened to you too, me too. And all of a sudden, in a room or in a group, you're like, oh, my cousin went through that as well, or I know my friend so and so. And all of a sudden you realize, wow, oh my gosh, I thought I was the
More
only one. and
common, right?
and there's all these people that are experiencing it. So I think the conversation is really important. And then to understand that, again, emotions are okay.
Yeah.
No one should ever tell someone, that you shouldn't feel sad about your miscarriage. It's a sense of loss,
Of
or that
course.
you shouldn't be scared or upset about the fact that you're having trouble conceiving. So the emotional part is real, and needs nurturing, and needs to be heard and dealt with separately. And I think that's also something we feel really passionate about Kindbody at Changing, is that for the longest time, women going through fertility journeys, their mental health was just ignored. It's like,
Right.
okay, we're going through this, here's the process, and no one was really taking care of or addressing their mental health needs, which is why we have therapists, as just part of our natural process
That's
that
amazing.
women can schedule appointments with virtually in the clinic, etc. So that's really important. And then, you know, and this is so much easier said than done, but for women to not take the burden of this process on their own shoulders and to rely on people in your life.
Yeah.
That could be your partner, it could be your friend, it could be your family member, it could be support groups of other women going through it, it could be your therapist, and just to really, and it can still be a private matter, and not saying not everyone likes to share these kinds of things, but at least under hearing that other people are going through it, I think can sometimes be comforting for women. And then to also realize that if we want to really combat fertility, if it's always or infertility, it's the inaction or the lack of action, the
Right.
lack of being proactive that typically makes the problem worse.
Yes.
So the sooner sometimes I meet couples and they're like, yeah, we've been trying to have a baby for 5 years and this is our first time coming to the doctor.
You're like,
And I'm like, God, I wish I had met you, 4.5 years ago, or I wish I met you 5 years ago before you even started trying. And that's why we really advocate. And one of the things that I feel really passionately about changing is right now, fertility is very reactionary.
right.
We wait for couples to have
Proactive.
a
Yeah.
problem before we address it. So I like to equate it to, you kind of wait for someone to have a heart attack before you tell them they should have lifestyle modifications or
Absolutely.
exercise. And what we really want to change is I really want to encourage every woman and every couple to go checked out. Even if you don't want to have a kid for another 10 years, what's the harm, right? Like you said yourself when you went for that assessment, okay, it wasn't so bad. And my
Right.
blood drawn, did an ultrasound. For men, it's a semen analysis,
Absolutely.
which is, not so bad.
Right.
And so when you think about it and you're like, okay, so I can go now, even though I'm not ready to have kids, and just at least get checked out, or my partner and I can go get checked out together, even though we're nowhere near wanting to have kids. And if we do find out something is wrong, we're probably going to have more options if we address it now
Yes.
than in the future. So I think it's being proactive is going to be key. Starting this conversation at a young age is key, and not pushing it off. It's an easy thing to push off.
Yeah, like I'm probably a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
And I know it's
uh,
not too late. I don't have that like story
No,
anymore,
no, no. Yeah.
but I definitely am probably a perfect example of someone who has had the information. And I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to delete this part so that Jenna can't hear me. But it'll be like the story that I probably should have. I've had the information. I still didn't do anything about it, and
Yeah.
not because I didn't see the value or the importance of it. It's really because of all of the things that I've already talked to you about, which is just this fear and failure and just like why am I here? How did I get here? How did I get
Oh,
to the point
absolutely.
where
Absolutely.
I have to have these conversations,
Yeah,
right?
I talk to women about that all the time because they're like, is the egg freezing process going to make me really emotional,
Yeah,
or is it really going to be um, anxiety provoking,
right.
or etc. And I'm like, it's really anxiety provoking and emotional, just the topic, right? Like a
Absolutely.
lot of women are like, oh my God, I didn't think I'd be at a point where I need to freeze my eggs. I thought by
No,
now I would have XYZ. And it's okay to be emotional about it, but let's be emotional and proactive.
absolutely. And I think it's funny. My dad, my entire life, has always taught me come from a position of strength, don't come from a position of weakness. And I think that's like a very male way to say it, but it's the same exact conversation that you're saying, is come from a position of being proactive versus a position of reactive. And I think when we come from that position, it's like knowing that you're enough to handle whatever information you
Right.
receive and whatever like course of action you need to take to achieve the things that you want.
Right.
And that's really what proactive means, right? And I think a lot of times we, myself included, have stayed stuck in whatever story we tell ourselves because we're scared. Like we're scared to step into the unknown. We're scared to, come from that space. But what we don't realize is happening is we're creating our own stress by
Mm-hmm.
not knowing we're
Right.
creating our own stress. And so it's like, you know, oftentimes we stay in this anxiety and we're like, man, I just, if something could just save me from the anxiety. And it's like, well, you have the key actually to save
Yeah.
yourself from the anxiety. You just have to like be strong enough to do it. And you have to choose proactive or a position of strength, however you want to phrase it,
Right.
and really step into it. And I think that this is really for women. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, all over the world, and there are people that
Yeah.
have horrible, you know, situations and stories, and there are people that don't. And I think this kind of gets like pushed to the side a little bit for a lot of women, but what we don't realize is we're like responsible for like keeping the human race like moving.
Yeah.
And so it actually should be one of the most important things that we talk about. And I think, you know, another part of why Labor of Love came to fruition, or why it's being started. I went to Haiti, I think it was in 2015. I like the years all meshing together. It's either 15 or 17. And when I was there, I spent time in a clinic.
Mm-hmm.
We did a lot of things, you know, help build clean water wells and whatnot. But at the clinic, I was able to see 9 babies born, and I was
Oh,
actually able to be a part of like the process, and it was just absolutely insane. And the reason I bring it up is because there are these, you know, there's these countries all over the world where having children, it's just, they did it with such like ease, and it was just very natural, and it was very like age didn't matter, and it does matter. I'm not saying age doesn't matter
yeah,
as far as
yeah,
the body is concerned, but it didn't matter that these women were like in their 40s, or that they already had like a bunch of children, and you know, it didn't matter, or if they had no children.
right.
And so I think going to the root of just being a woman, and stripping the idea of this like fear based, or this like stress based, or thinking that you need to be in a certain position or place to be able to discuss family planning, however that looks in your life,
Yeah.
is really like such an important topic. And that's why I think it's so important for me to have it be covered, especially during the launch, because I think this is, it's something that really weighs on women heavily. And so when we come from this idea of like, how do we have all of the things that we want in life, a lot of times children is part of that. um,
Absolutely. And to be okay with that too. I mean,
yeah.
I think key things for us to understand is, you know, and these are some of kind of our mantras at Kindbody, is awareness is power,
Yes.
right? And to own your future. And when I say own your future, it's yours though. It's not mine. And to really be okay with whatever it is that you envision in your life,
Mm-hmm.
and to live a life of no regrets, and recognize that there's steps you can take to prolong your reproductive journey if you want to, or delay your reproductive journey if you want to. And um, and then I think it's really, really important for women to understand how important it is for us to take care of ourselves,
Yeah.
and to be personally fulfilled, and to have a sense of our own worth and achievement and confidence, um, before we have children. Because I meet, and I'm sure everybody can in some way relate to this, but you either meet women who or couples, you know, women on their own who feel that having a child is somehow going to create a sense of fulfillment, or couples who are in broken relationships,
That are
or
connected, right.
and they think that having a baby will somehow fix that.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, now as like a physician, as a woman, and as a mom, that that's definitely not the path. Having a child, it is not going
It's
to, if
the
you're
first,
not
right.
already fulfilled, or your relationship is broken, 99.9% of the time, it's actually going to make your problem worse.
Right.
Um, and to really stress, and this isn't in any way take away the desire and the
No.
fear and the anxiety that does surround motherhood and our desires for motherhood, but how important it is for us as women to love ourselves and to really feel fulfilled with our own person before we say that I'm going to gain this fulfillment from a child.
Right. No,
from
absolutely
the
true. And
pregnancy.
I think that now more than ever, and again, not that this is all about me. I'm just trying to use my stories
Yeah,
so
yeah,
people can understand, like even someone like me who's like starting a own business and, building this dream that I've always dreamed about. I still have always wanted this and it still hasn't happened the way I thought it was going to happen. But I think I'm closer than I've ever been. I think in order for me to be the best mom I could possibly be in the future, um, I needed to have this time to learn how to love myself and to understand my own worth and my own value and, to enjoy and be fulfilled on my own without expecting another person to be a part of fulfilling that. So whether it's a partner, a friend, a child, whatever the case may be, I think you bring up a really, really good point. Um, Going into parenthood, whether it's man or woman, I think that knowing that that child isn't going to fill a gap or fulfill a space or whatever the case may be, is really important. And I think it sets you up to win. It sets the kid up to win. It sets, all of those things up for win,
exactly.
versus, the opposite. So I think that point is super important. And I think if people, get to have that conversation with themselves, do I love myself? Like, do I accept myself? Do I,
Right.
you know, have I explored all of the things that I want? And yes, this is a piece of it, but what is my intention behind it?
Exactly. Absolutely. So, so important. And I think if we allow ourselves to do that, I mean, not only does that help us emotionally, physically, and and takes away that stressful burden, but gosh, we'd be so much happier, you know,
I know
for it in the long run. And these are all obviously, you know, huge monumental tasks, right?
they are.
And certainly, don't mean to be like, oh, love your, I understand that can be so difficult, and there's so many things in all of our lives that can impact our ability to do that, our upbringing, our childhood, our economic status, our social status,
Yeah,
our careers, our finances, how we're loved, who we have as a support system. So many of those things can impact our sense of fulfillment, our sense of self, but so important for women to own that and to really find our own happiness, and not the happiness that our mom has for us or
absolutely.
that society has for us, but what is my own happiness,
Yeah,
uh, and to be okay if that happiness is different than what maybe even you yourself thought it would
right.
be when you were younger.
Exactly. Okay, cool. So I wanted to ask you two things. One, first, if you were to be speaking to a younger woman in, let's say, like early 30s and below, what are two things that you would want them to know about either their bodies or their fertility? And then I'm going to ask you the same question on older women. What are two things that you would want them to know about their fertility or their bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll actually answer both together because my message to both women would be the same.
Yeah.
And we kind of said it before, but it's worth repeating. You are never too young or too old to learn more about your body, to learn more about your fertility, and to learn about your options.
Yeah.
Because regardless of how old you are, we spend the majority of our lives trying really hard to not get pregnant.
Yeah.
And so when the time comes, we unfortunately just don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
And this is to no fault of any one woman. It's just we're never taught. When would we be taught it, right? It's not part of any education.
No.
It's not even, I argue, even physicians who went to medical school, unless they're OBGYNs, have no idea.
No.
And so don't be afraid of going to the doctor and having this evaluation and doing a fertility assessment. Again, whether you're 20 or you're 45,
Mhm.
and be open to hearing what the answers are, and
Right.
then hearing the options, and the options are not going to, no two people will hear the options the same either. So
No.
you're going to take those options and then make them based on your ideas, based on your own goals. Will hear and interpret what works for you.
Yeah.
But I really do. I encourage women of all ages to not just assume you're great and you have nothing to worry about, and then don't assume that, oh, my ship has sailed, I'm too old. That everybody still has some options, and everybody at the very least owes it to herself to
Yeah.
learn more about her body, and then explore the options with an actual provider, as opposed to like trying to Google it for yourself, or you know, sometimes like our friends can be our best allies and our worst enemies. They're like, oh, well, I went and this is what happened to me, and
Totally different stories for
you
everyone.
may have a different story.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice to both those age groups
Yeah.
is do an assessment, and then learn your own truths, learn your own objective data, and then be with a trusted provider, like us at Kindbody, where we can then help you explore your options.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything? I think I'm going to add some information for our readers to learn more about Kindbody, and obviously some of the questions that we've prefaced this conversation with will be included in the piece. But anything else you want to add?
No, I think that people talk about the year of the woman and whatever. I think it's the time that we make every day and every moment a time of women,
Yeah,
and we really just need to start being each other's allies,
support.
um,
Yeah,
and the best way that we can advocate for each other is by giving each other a voice, and to start ending the stigmas that surround reproductive health, and even our periods, menstrual cycles, and our miscarriages and our bodies and our
yeah,
desires, because that's really at the core of it. Is the more we talk about these topics, truly the less scary they become.
yeah.
And then to know that it's 2020, and there's so many new technologies and new advances that can make things possible that once would have only been a dream, and to take advantage of those, if they're right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, we'll get some more information out there. And as the site continues to live on, I really do look forward to developing a relationship with Kindbody and with you. And so
Thank
that
you.
we can really like teach people about this, and dive
Absolutely.
into like the specifics around it, and get more people into, getting assessments on their bodies and learning more about their fertility, and figuring out what their next step is based off
Yeah.
whatever it is that they dream about having in life.
And I wish you all the best in your journey, both professionally and personally, and on your pathway to motherhood. It
Yeah.
resonates that it's something really important to you, and I hope that everything you've ever dreamed of, comes to and more.